We are on part 3, and this is the Passovers across the centuries. Want to very quickly review Exodus 12, 1 to 11 is where we see the original Passover story. We begin the calendar with this month. Then we have the 10th day of the month when we select the lambs. The 14th of the month is when the assembly of the community of Israel is to slaughter the lamb and smear the blood on the doorposts and the side frames of the houses. Exodus 12, 15 to 20 is when we see an institution of the festival of matzah. It says, for 7 days you are to eat matzah. On the first day, remove the leaven from your houses. Whoever eats hametz, leavened bread, from the first to the 7th day is to be cut off from Israel. On the 1st and the 7th days you are to have an assembly set aside for God. On these days no work is to be done, except what each must do to prepare his food. You may do only that. You are to observe the festival of matzah on this very day. I brought your divisions out of the land of Egypt. So what we see is that the festival of matzah, when we begin it, we are honoring the day that he brought everyone out of Egypt. That is the day. You to observe this day from generation to generation by a perpetual regulation. From the evening of the 14th day of the first month until the evening of the 21st day, eat matzah. During those 7 days, no leaven is to be found in your houses. Whoever eats food with hametz is to be cut off from the community of Israel. It doesn't matter whether he's a foreigner or a citizen of the land. Eat nothing with hametz in it. Wherever you live, eat matzah. So we see the festival of matzah is 7 days, starting with the evening of the 14th, and then the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th. All righty, then we see Exodus 12, 29 to 36. At midnight, Adonai killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh sitting on his throne to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon. Pharaoh got up in the night, he and his servants and the Egyptians, and there was horrendous wailing in Egypt. There wasn't a single house without someone dead. He summoned Moshe and Aaron by night and said, up and leave. Okay, they got out with permission. They took the dough, it was unleavened. They asked the Egyptians to give them silver and gold, they did it. This way, they received the promises that Abraham had been told they would leave with many possessions. So the 15th day, they are leaving Egypt. This is the beginning of the festival of matzah. Numbers 33, 2 to 4. They began the journey from Ramses in the first month. On the 15th day of the first month, the morning after Pesach, the people of Israel left proudly in the view of all the Egyptians. While the Egyptians were burying those among them whom Adonai had killed, all their firstborn, Adonai also executed judgment on the gods. Leviticus 23, 6 to 8. On the 15th day of the same month is the festival of matzah for 7 days. Eat matzah. First day, holy convocation. 7th day, holy convocation. Again, the evenings of the 14th through the 20th. That's the 7 days. But here's this interesting part that we haven't talked about yet. Exodus 13, 17 to 22. After Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not guide them to the highway that goes through the land of the Philistines. Rather, God led the people by a roundabout route through the desert by the sea of Suf. The people of Israel went up from the land of Egypt fully armed. They traveled from Sukkot and set up camp in Etam at the edge of the desert. Adonai went ahead of them in a column of cloud during the daytime to lead them on their way, and at night a column of fire that gave them light. Thus they could travel both by day and by night. Neither the column of cloud by day nor the column of fire at night went away from in front of the people. God is showing his manifested presence as they left and they escaped from Egypt. The whole time they traveled, for 40 years, he continued to show them. He led them by the column of the cloud during the daytime and the column of fire at night. In Exodus 14, we see where he led them. Adonai said to Moshe, "Tell the people of Israel to turn around and set up camp in front of Pi-Hahirot, between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal Zephon camp, opposite it, by the sea." Exodus 14, 8 and 9. Pharaoh pursued the people of Israel as they left boldly. The Egyptians went after them, all the horses and the chariots of Pharaoh, with his cavalry and army, and overtook them as they were encamped by the sea, by Pi-Hahirot in front of Baal Zephon. Exodus 14, 15 to 16. Adonai asked Moshe, "Why are you crying to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift your staff, reach out with your hand over the sea, divide it in two. The people of Israel will advance into the sea on dry ground." Exodus 14, 19 to 20. The column of cloud moved away from in front of them and stood behind them. It stationed itself between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel. There was a cloud and darkness here, but light by night there. So the one did not come near the other all night long. Can you imagine what that would be like? They are following the cloud and the fire, and this is their guide for everything. And then suddenly, the cloud moves away from the front of them and gets behind them. I'm sure they're bewildered. What are we supposed to do? We were supposed to follow it. But the cloud stops the Egyptians from chasing after them. As they were being pursued, the cloud got in the way. So the Egyptians ended up dead in this sea of reeds. Exodus 14, 21 to 29. Moshe reached his hand out over the sea, and Adonai caused the sea to go back before a strong east wind all night. He made the sea become dry land, and its water was divided in two. And then the people of Israel went into the sea on the dry ground, with the water walled up for them on the right and the left. The Egyptians continued their pursuit, going after them into the sea. All Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and cavalry, just before dawn, Adonai caused the wheels of their chariots to break off, so they could move only with difficulty. The Egyptians said, "Adonai is fighting for Israel against the Egyptians. Let's get away from them." Adonai said to Moshe, "Reach your hand out over the sea, and the water will return and cover the Egyptians with their chariots and cavalry." Moshe reached his hand out over the sea, and by dawn the sea had returned to its former depth. The Egyptians tried to flee. Adonai swept them into the sea. The water came and covered all the chariots and the cavalry of Pharaoh's army who had followed them into the sea. Not even one of them was left. But the people of Israel walked on the dry ground in the sea, with the water walled up for them on the right and the left. So what do we see in this scripture? We see that they were led to the sea. The Pharaoh and the chariots were chasing after them, and as they got to the edge of the sea, God said, "I'm going to do a miracle in front of all of these Egyptians. I'm going to part the sea, and you're going to walk right on through." So he parts the sea as a part of their victory. The cloud has led them up to this point, right up to the point where they're stuck and have no place to go. Does God do that for us sometimes? He leads us up to a place where we're stuck. We have no place else to go but to wait for a miracle. And he parts the sea for us. And so he did. And so the enemy was behind, chasing after. And you know what I see in this picture is that we make this decision to follow God, and sooner than we think, the enemy will come chasing after us because we got free. And the enemy comes after us, and we get stuck in a place, and God says, don't worry, I've got this. I'm going to open up the sea for you. So they have to come through, running through with their kneading bowls, with all of the things they got from Egypt, and they have to run through the water. But it's dry ground, and then the water just closes up on them. Closes up on the Egyptians, I should say, as they're following. And those chariots get stuck in the water. And you know, to this day, archaeologists have found those chariots in the water. They found broken wheels. They found them. This is a true story. So that was how they escaped. They got through the waters. Exodus 16. He says, after they get out, now I'm going to test you. This is the way it is for all of us. We get free from the enemy, but the enemy will still keep trying to chase after us. And when we get through the waters of baptism, we get to the other side, and the enemy is stuck. He is stopped in his tracks and can't come past us. But it's only then that the Israelites are told, you have to remove the leaven out of your camp. You have to stop having sin in the camp. Isn't that the picture of our walk with God? He delivers us from the enemy, but then he says, now clean up the sin. He doesn't tell us to do it first. He tells us to do it after we have entered into the covenant with him. So Exodus 16 says, on the 15th day of the second month, remember they left in the first month. On the 15th day of the second month, after leaving the land of Egypt, there in the desert, the whole community of the people of Israel grumbled against Moshe and Aaron. What? They just had the most incredible miracles. They came out of Egypt with great wealth, and now they're grumbling at the leader. You know, you guys, you're messed up. What are you bringing us here for? We don't have any good food to eat. We want that stuff we had in Egypt. You brought us here to starve to death. So Adonai says to Moshe, here I will cause bread to rain down from heaven for you. The people are to go out and gather a day's ration. When they prepare what they have brought in, it will turn out to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. The sixth day is the big deal. Gather twice as much. He says, I'm going to test you whether you will observe my Torah or not. Are you going to listen to my words? This is the test. Go out and gather double on the sixth day so that you can have leftovers and eat them on the seventh day. I want you to rest on the seventh day. He says, this is a test. Will you obey me? So this is again the second month. It's the 15th day. Exodus 16, 13 to 15. That evening, quails came up and covered the camp, while in the morning there was a layer of dew all around the camp. When the dew had evaporated, there on the surface of the desert was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they asked each other, Manhu, that's Hebrew for what is it? We say manna, but it's actually manhu. What is it? What is that white stuff all over the ground? They did not know what it was. And Moses said, it's the bread which Adonai has given you to eat. Exodus 16, 22 to 30. On the 6th day they did gather twice as much bread. 2 omers, that's a measurement of how much the canister was. 2 omers per person. Today eat that. Today is Shabbat for Adonai. You won't find anything in the field. Gather for 6 days, but the 7th day is Shabbat. There won't be any. Adonai has given you Shabbat. That is why he is providing bread for 2 days on the 6th day. Each of you, stay where you are. No one leave his place on the 7th day. Just rest. This was the test. Exodus 16:34. The people of Israel ate manhu for 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate man until they had arrived at the border of the land of Canaan. So 40 years he provided their food every day faithfully. It took 40 years for them to finally get their act together. 40 years, the people who were the original ones who left Egypt all died. And when they had all died, that was when God was going to bring them into the promised land. He was not going to bring Egypt into the new place. All those people who came out of Egypt had brought a piece of Egypt with them. He said, not going to pollute the promised land. So can you imagine if you were the last person from Egypt, and the whole camp is waiting for you to die? They're all watching. When are you just going to drop off so we can get in there? We're tired of this manna. Exodus 40, verse 1. Here's something interesting. This is their journey through the desert. It's the first day of the first month, so that's Nisan 1, but it's the second year. The second year. They haven't left the wilderness yet. They've got 39 more years to go. It says that they set up the tabernacle on Nisan 1, the beginning of the new year. The tabernacle was set up. And what's the purpose of that? Because that's where God showed up. The cloud covered the tent of meeting. The glory of Adonai filled the tabernacle. He set it up on the spiritual New Year's Day. The cloud was always above the tabernacle all day. The fire was in the cloud at night, and the house of Israel could see the manifested presence of God wherever they traveled. And that was set up on Nisan 1, New Year's Day of the spiritual calendar. So now they're in their second year of the journey. We see in Numbers 9. Adonai spoke to Moshe. This is the first month of the second year after they left the land. And he told them, you have to observe Pesach at the specific time, the 14th day of the month at dusk. And Moshe told the people, and so they did observe Pesach at dusk on the 14th day. They acted according to what the regulations were. Okay? Now, Numbers 10 says, these are some of the things you do at Passover. Numbers 10:10. On your days of rejoicing at designated times, on Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, sound the trumpet over the burnt offerings and over your sacrifices of your peace offerings. Well, Nisan 1 is a new moon. Sound the trumpet over the burnt offerings. Leviticus 23. These are set times, the designated appointments, the holy convocations. In the first month, Nisan, on the 14th day, between sundown and complete darkness, comes Pesach. These are the regulations that Moses wrote for them so that they could follow them year after year. Then we see the second chance Passover. We're going to look through all the Passovers in the Bible. Numbers 9, 10 to 13. It says, tell the people of Israel, if now or any time in the future generations you are unclean because of a corpse. That means you were in the presence of a dead body, a funeral, or you had to touch a dead animal for some reason. If you're unclean because of a corpse, or if you're on a trip abroad, nevertheless, you must observe Pesach. but you observe it in the second month on the 14th day. So you may have skipped the first one, but you'd better catch the second one, okay? They are to eat it with matzah and maror. Don't break any of the bones of this Pesach sacrifice. The person who is clean and not on a trip who fails to observe it will be cut off from his people, and he will bear the consequences of his sin. Pesach Sheni is the term. It means second Passover. It's in the second month of the year, Pesach Sheni. So after Pesach Sheni, do you still have the Feast of Matzah? Numbers 10, 11 to 12. On the 20th day of the second month. Remember, the first month is where we had the Feast of Matzah, and now we have it again. Watch. 20th day of the second month of the second year, the cloud was taken up. Why the 20th day? Because the Feast of Matzah goes until the 20th day. And it says, on the 20th day, the cloud lifted from the tabernacle and started to move on. So the presence, the manifested presence of God, stayed over the tabernacle for the Feast of Matzah, and then said, okay, time to move out. So even then, God was observing Passover Sheni. He waited till the second month before the cloud moved on. 40 years later, we see in Deuteronomy 16, 1 to 8, observe the month of Aviv, keep Pesach. Why? Because Adonai brought you out of Egypt at night. Sacrifice the Pesach offering in the place where Adonai will choose to have his name live. This is a new addition to the regulations. He says, you're gonna do this Passover, but I'm gonna tell you where. Up to this point, we've been just wandering around in the desert, but I'm gonna tell you where. And so that's coming. That will be in Jerusalem at the temple. Alrighty, so he says, 7 days you eat matzah. It's called the bread of affliction. You came out of Egypt in haste. It's to remind you that you were afflicted. You were carrying the bread dough on your back. You sacrifice the Pesach offering in the evening when the sun sets, at the time of year you came out of Egypt. That's 40 years later that he's telling them to do all that. So it is an instituted observance. Then we go to the book of Joshua, and we see that Joshua celebrated it in verse 5 to 8. It says, Yehoshua, or Joshua, said to the people, consecrate yourselves. Tomorrow Adonai is going to work wonders among you. He said to the Kohanim, the priests, take the ark for the covenant, go on ahead of the people. And they took the ark for the covenant and went ahead of the people. Adonai said to Joshua, starting today, I will make you great in full view of Israel, so that you will know that just as I was with Moshe, I am with you. You are to order the Kohanim carrying the ark for the covenant as follows. When you come to the edge of the Jordan River, Yarden, you are to stop in the Yarden itself. Doesn't this remind us of Moses having to go up to the sea, and they're stuck there with the enemy chasing them, and then they have nowhere to go? He opens up the river for them. This is what happens with Joshua. Same thing. Joshua 3, 9 to 13. Joshua said to the people of Israel, come here and listen to the words of Adonai your God. Joshua said, here is how you will know that the living God is here with you, and that without fail he will drive out from before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and the Jebusites. What a mouthful. The ark for the covenant of the Lord and all the earth is going on ahead of you across the Yarden. Now, choose yourself 12 men out of the tribes, one for each tribe. As soon as the Kohanim carrying the ark of Adonai put their soles in the feet in the water of the Yarden, the water will be cut off upstream and stand piled up like an embankment. Is he not reenacting the Passover experience? He absolutely is. And guess what? He reenacts it right at Passover. Joshua 3, 15 to 17. When those carrying the ark had come to the Yarden, the Kohanim carrying the ark waded into the water. For throughout harvest season, the Yarden overflows its banks. The harvest season, he's talking about this harvest they're about to have, the barley harvest. The water upstream stood, piled up like an embankment for a great distance at Edom, the city next to Tashtan, and so that the water flowing downstream toward the Sea of Arava, the Dead Sea, was cut off. The people crossed over, passed over. The Kohanim, carrying the ark for the covenant of Adonai, stood fast on dry ground in the middle of the Yarden, while all Israel crossed on dry ground until the entire nation had finished crossing the Yarden. Who are these people? All the original ones have died. This is a new set. These are the children that were born during the wilderness experience. These are the descendants who have not been polluted by the experience in Egypt. God gives them the same deliverance that they had heard about from their parents. So now we're at the first month. Remember, that's Nisan, the 10th day. In the story with Moses, that was the day to select the lamb and get ready for something special to happen. Joshua 4, 18 to 23. The Kohanim carrying the ark for the covenant of Adonai came up from the Yarden riverbed. As soon as the soles of the feet of the Kohanim touched dry ground, the water of the Yarden returned to its place, and the river overflowed its banks, just like before. The people came out of the Yarden on when? The 10th day of the first month. Does God keep a calendar? You bet. It's another 10th day of the month. It's significant, something significant. Those 12 stones which they took out of the Yarden, Joshua piled up at Gilgal. He said to the people of Israel, in the future, when your children ask their fathers what these stones mean, you are to explain it to them. Isn't that what Moses said? You are to tell your children what happened. He's telling the new breed, you are to teach your children. It's part of the covenant, okay? And he says, just as Adonai your God did to the sea of Suf when he dried up in front of us until we crossed. It's the same experience that our fathers had. All the ones who are dead now, they had this experience. God just gave us the same experience. Isn't that amazing? 40 years later. And so this happened on the 10th of Nisan. This was the day that Israelites were supposed to bring their lambs into the houses for inspection. So now, again, 40 years later, this generation has never been circumcised. They were wandering around in the desert. Nobody did circumcision. But that was a requirement to eat the Passover sacrifice. Is that not right? Requirement. So here's what happens. Joshua 5, verse 1, and then verse 8 to 12. It was at that time that Adonai said to Joshua, make yourself knives of flint, circumcise the people of Israel again a second time. Not that they were circumcised a second time. All those people are dead. It says, these were the children of the original Israelites who left Egypt. None had been circumcised. When all the nation had been circumcised, every one of them, they stayed where they were in camp until they healed. The people of Israel camped at Gilgal, and they observed Pesach on the 14th day of the month. So it was the 10th day that they went through the water, and it was the 14th day they observed Passover right on time. The day after Pesach, they ate what the land produced, matzah and the roasted ears of grain that day. The following day, after they'd eaten food produced in the land, the manna stopped. No more manna. They didn't need it anymore. That was for the grumbling and complaining generation who had died. This generation was fresh blood. They didn't have Egypt in them. They didn't need the manna. So from then on, the people of Israel no longer had manna. Instead, that year, they ate the produce of the land of Canaan. So let's look at our timetable. Pesach, the 14th day, slaughtering the lamb. Matzah, the Feast of Matzah begins on the 15th. The following day, the 16th, is to bring a first fruit offering. And it shows us in the text, the day after Pesach, they ate what the land produced. Why is that significant? God puts things in there for a reason. Why did he say that? Because there was a regulation in Leviticus. It's in the red letters at the bottom. You are not to eat the bread, dried grain or fresh grain until the day you bring the offering. The offering, the first fruit offering comes first. Then you can eat the rest of the grain. You always do an offering of your produce before you get to have your produce. It's the same principle with tithing. You bring this portion of your income, the first part of it is your first fruit. The rest of it, you get to partake of it, but you don't eat your seed. Okay? That's the principle. Now, the next Passover, King Josiah. At this point, Israel has walked away from their covenant again. It says 2 Kings 22, 1-2. Josiah, or Yoshiyahu, was 8 years old when he began his reign. Can you imagine an 8-year-old in charge of a country? He ruled 31 years in Jerusalem. He did what was right from Adonai's perspective, living entirely in the manner of David, his ancestor, and turning away neither to the right nor the left. So, we know from the story that all the kings before him were wicked. They had abandoned the Torah. They had left the temple that had been built by Solomon. They left it in disrepair. So this king, Josiah, paid laborers to repair the temple. And while they were repairing things inside the temple, they discovered a Torah scroll. King Josiah had never seen it. He's 8 years old. He had not seen it. So we have 2 Kings 22, 11-13. It says, after the king had heard what was written in the scroll of the Torah, he tore his clothes. This was a sign of mourning. He was very upset. The king issued an order to the Kohen, the priests, go and consult Adonai for me, for the people and all Yehudah in regard to what is written in this scroll, which has been found. For Adonai must be furious at us, since our ancestors did not listen to the words written in the scroll and didn't do everything written there that concerns us. What's the first thing he does? Let's clean up our act. We're going to celebrate Passover. Isn't that the story? We're going to get out of Egypt and we're going to celebrate Passover. It's our first sign of our covenant with God, of the deliverance, okay? 2 Kings 23, 1-3. It says, the king summoned all the leaders of Yehudah and Jerusalem. He read in their hearing everything written in the scroll of the covenant that he had found. The king stood on the platform and he made a covenant in the presence of Adonai to live following Adonai, observing the mitzvot, instructions, and regulations wholeheartedly, to confirm the words of the covenant written in the scroll. And all the people stood, pledging themselves to keep the covenant. Isn't that what they did with Moses? Whatever the words are, we'll do them. And then they didn't. What happens with Josiah? He says, we're going to follow the covenant, and we're going to first of all observe Pesach, because it says we're supposed to. So he goes on and he says to the people, observe Pesach to Adonai your God, as written in this scroll of the covenant. Pesach had not been observed since the days when the judges ruled Israel. That's how long. So Josiah got rid of the mediums, the people using spirit guides, household gods, the idols, the disgusting things spotted everywhere and anywhere in Yehuda and Yerushalayim. He did this in order to establish the words of Torah. King Josiah drained the swamp. He cleaned up the sin in the land. He said, no more of this. We are going to observe the words of the Torah. So it goes on to say, he turned to Adonai with all his heart, with all his being, and all of his power, in accordance to the Torah of Moshe, and nor did any king like him arise afterward. Sad, but true. We see another Passover. This one is Ezekiel 45, verse 18. On the first day of the first month, take a young bull without defect, purify the sanctuary. What happened on the first day of the first month with Moses? They lifted the tabernacle. The glory of the Lord came on that day. So here is Ezekiel being told, on the first day of the first month, when I'm going to land on you and show you my glory, you'd better purify the sanctuary. And he says to Cohen, take some of the blood from the sin offering and put it on the door frames of the house. Where have we seen that? In the original Passover story. Thus, you will make atonement for the house. Then he tells Ezekiel, on the 14th day of the first month, have Pesach. Then, the 7 days long, you're going to have matzah, Feast of Unleavened Bread. On the 15th day of the 7th month, you're going to have Sukkot. He has just named the 3 feast days that are mandated for all the Israelites to come to Jerusalem to the temple. Those are the 3. Now we go to King Cyrus. You've heard of him? In Hebrew it's Koresh. And then also King Darius. It says in Ezra 6:1, Darius the king issued an order and search was made in the archive building where treasures were stored in Babylon. And there was found in the palace, guess what? A scroll. They found a Torah scroll. In the first year of Koresh the king, he issued a decree, quote, concerning the house of God in Jerusalem, let the house be rebuilt. Why? Because it had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 586. They had destroyed the Temple of Solomon. He said, let it be rebuilt, the place where they offer sacrifices. And he says, let the governor of the Judeans and the leaders of the Judeans rebuild this house of God on its site. Okay, that was in the decree that Darius had found. Remember, he found a scroll written, and it was buried somewhere in the palace. And in the scroll was an order from King Cyrus. And Darius is going, wait a minute. Did we carry this order out? We were supposed to. So he issues the order, carry this out to the letter. And so, with a rebuilt temple, the Jews would be able to follow the regulations to sacrifice the lambs in the temple. That was what Moses had said. You're going to be sacrificing in a place where I designate. And later, God designated it to be the temple. So we see in Ezra 6, 18 to 22, they installed the Kohanim, the priests, in their divisions, and the Levites, the Leviim, in their orders for the service of God in Yerushalayim, as written in the book of Moshe. Moshe had designated, this is the order of the priests. That means we're going to have this many priests, and each one has an order there, will appear as priests in the temple. They will have their turn to go into the temple as the priests and make the offerings. When their turn is over, the next one comes. When their turn is over, the next one comes. Okay? That's what he's talking about. So the people from the exile, those who had been kicked out of their land because the temple was destroyed, they were the people from the exile. They kept Pesach on the 14th day of the first month. Why? Because they figured it out. It was found in the scroll that there was an order the king had given to support this. And so it says that the people of Israel returned from the exile, and all those who had renounced filthy practices of the nations, they had to clean up, they had to be circumcised, they had to be clean before they could celebrate the Passover. They renounced the filthy practices, and then they ate the Pesach lamb and joyfully kept the feast of matzah for 7 days. For Adonai had filled them with joy by turning the heart of the king of Ashur toward them. And he assisted them in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. So here's a king telling them, I support what you're doing, even though I'm not one of those people of Israel. I support the God of Israel, and I'm going to let the people of Israel start rebuilding the temple. What do they do after they clean it up? First thing, celebrate Pesach. It's our covenant. It's our supper with our God. All right, then we have a wicked king, Ahaz. 2 Chronicles 28, 16 to 19. It was at that time that King Ahaz sent to the king of Ashur to help him. For again, the people from Edom had come, attacking Yehudah and carrying off captives. Isn't that common for those poor Israelites? They're getting dragged all over the place. The Philistines had invaded the cities. Adonai brought Yehudah low. Why? Because Ahaz, the king of Israel, had caused disturbances in Yehudah. He had acted treacherously against Adonai. As the king, he brought curses upon the land. When we have a wicked president, it brings curses upon our nation. 2 Chronicles 28, 24 to 25. Ahaz collected the equipment from the house of God. What? Does he dare to go into the house of God and take the menorah and the table of showbread and all the gold pieces? Does he dare? Well, he did. He collected those from the house of God. He broke to pieces the equipment from the house of God. He sealed the doors of the house of Adonai. He made himself altars in every corner of Yerushalayim. In every city of Yehudah he made high places for offering to other gods, thus provoking Adonai, the God of his ancestors. This is a wicked king, the king of Israel. So Ahaz died, and you know, his son was Hezekiah. Hezekiah took the throne. 2 Chronicles, he drains the swamp. It doesn't. This is what we have to do if we're going to get God's favor. Drain the swamp. 2 Chronicles 29, 1 to 5. Hezekiah was 25 years old when he began his reign. He did what was right from Adonai's perspective, following the example of everything David, his ancestor, had done. In the first month of the first year of his reign, he reopened the doors of the house of Adonai and repaired them. Then he brought in the Kohanim, the Levites, assembled them in the open space to the east, and said, "Listen to me, Levites, consecrate yourselves now. Consecrate the house of Adonai, the God of your ancestors. Remove the filth from the holy place." So, verse 17. Then they began consecrating, and guess what day? The first day of the first month, Nisan 1. Nisan 1. And on the 8th day of the month, they reached the vestibule of Adonai. And then they consecrated the house of Adonai in 8 more days. On the 16th day of the month, they had finished. Why is that important? 16th day of the month is after Passover, when they make the first fruit offering. However, it says in the text, they're busy cleaning up the house. They didn't celebrate Passover. They missed it. So what are they supposed to do? What does the scripture say? Passover Shani, second Passover. Okay, I guess we have to do it in the second month. So they do. Hezekiah finds that in the scriptures. It says in 2 Chronicles 31-5, Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Yehuda, summoning them to the house of Adonai in Jerusalem. Why? Because he sees in the scripture they're supposed to appear in Jerusalem to keep the Pesach to Adonai, the God of Israel. For the king, his officials, and the entire Yerushalayim community had agreed to keep the Pesach in the second month. Scriptural. They're not changing anything. It's in the scriptures. They had not been able to observe it at the proper time because the Kohanim had not consecrated themselves. They were unclean. Also, the people had not assembled in Jerusalem. That was one of the orders. The king issued a decree that they should come to keep the Pesach to Adonai, the God of Israel, at Yerushalayim. For only a few had been observing it as it was prescribed. So we see in verse 13-15, thus many people assembled in Yerushalayim to keep the festival of Matzot in the second month. So that answers our question. When the scripture tells us you missed the Passover and you can do it in the second month, well, that means you missed the Feast of Matzah too. So you get to do that in the second month. We see it confirmed in scripture, okay? First, they set about removing the altars, cleaning up everything. They removed the altars for incense. They threw them in the Kidron Valley, and then they slaughtered the Pesach lamb on the 14th day of the second month. And they had such a good time that they doubled it. Watch what they did. Verse 27. The people of Israel there in Yerushalayim observed the festival of Matzot for 7 days with great joy. They ate throughout the festival for 7 days, offering the sacrifices of peace offerings and giving thanks. And then the whole assembly decided to celebrate for another 7 days. They were having way too much joy. They doubled it, 14 days. Adonai heard their voice, and their prayer came up to the holy place where he lives, heaven. Now we have a hidden Passover. It doesn't actually use the word Passover, but we know all these dates for Passover, right? We know that the 14th is the day of the slaughter of the lamb, and we know that Yeshua was in the tomb on the 14th, 15th, 16th, 3 days, 3 nights in the tomb. We know that. So let's take a look at the story of Esther, where the name of God never appears in the book. Esther 3, 8-9. Haman, the wicked guy, he was prime minister to the king Ahasuerus. Haman says to the king, there is a particular people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws, those Jews, are different than the rest of the people. Moreover, they don't observe the king's laws. He's trying to get these guys in trouble. Do you see that? It doesn't befit the king to tolerate them. If it please the king, have a decree written for their destruction. This is a betrayal of the Jewish people. Yes? You can see that. Esther 12, verse 12-13, it says, the king's secretaries were summoned on what day? 13th day of the first month. Nisan. Nisan 13. What do we know about Nisan 14? It's the slaughter of the lamb. What do we know if we fast forward to Yeshua being crucified on the 14th? He's having his Last Supper on the 13th, and he's betrayed. And here in the story of Esther, we see the betrayal on the 13th of Nisan. It says, they wrote down all of Haman's orders. In the name of King Ahasuerus, they sealed it with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by courier to all the royal provinces, to destroy, kill, and exterminate all Jews, from the young to the old, including the small children and women, on a specific day, the 13th of the 12th month. The end of the year was going to be slaughter day for the Jews. But the plot was set in motion. The betrayal was signed with the king's signet ring on Nisan 13, betrayal day of Yeshua. Esther 4, 15 to 16. Now we know about Yeshua, 3 days in the tomb, and then he has victory over the enemy. In Esther it says, "Go and assemble all the Jews to be found in Shushan and have them fast for me, neither eating nor drinking, 3 days, night and day." These match up with the days Yeshua was in the tomb. These match up with the Passover story. "Also, I and the girls attending me are going to fast in the same way. I will go into the king, which is against the law. If I perish, I perish." So on the 3rd day, after she has had the community fasting, on the 3rd day, she put on her royal robes and stood in the inner courtyard of the king's palace, opposite the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the king's hall, across the entrance to the hall. When the king saw Esther the queen standing in the courtyard, she won his favor. The king extended the gold scepter in his hand toward Esther. So she overturned the judgment against the Jews on the 3rd day, matching the 3rd day when Yeshua rose, and he conquered the enemy. Hidden Passover. What does the name Esther mean? Hidden. Hidden. So we know Yeshua also observed Pesach. We see it in Luke 2, 41 to 47. Every year, Yeshua's parents went to Yerushalayim for the festival of Pesach. Okay, he's a kid, he's 12 years old, but he has been observing Pesach. Then, remember the story. He stays in the temple and he's sitting with all of the Torah scholars, answering questions. And his parents go on along with the rest of the caravan to go home. There's thousands of them in the caravan. They don't even realize he's missing. They think he's probably hanging out with some of his friends in the caravan. But they get back to their hometown and find out he's not there. They have to go back to Jerusalem, try to figure out where their son is. And it says, on the 3rd day, they found him. The 3rd day. Does that match up with the rest of our calendar that God set in motion? The 3rd day. He was sitting in the temple court among the rabbis, not only listening to them, but questioning what they said. Everyone who heard him was astonished at his insight and his responses. So, let's look at a few of the responses. We're just about done. Matthew 26:1, it says, when Yeshua had finished speaking, now he's an adult, he's talking to his disciples. He said to them, as you know, Pesach is 2 days away. This is just before crucifixion. It's 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be nailed to the execution stake. Verse 20, when the evening came, Yeshua reclined with the 12 disciples. He is celebrating Pesach with them, okay? As they were eating, he said, I tell you, one of you is going to betray me. This was Nisan 13, before his crucifixion. Nisan 13, the same day Haman betrayed the Jews. And you can look this up also in Mark 14, Luke 22, John 2, 6, 11, and 12. Those are all Passover references. So why does he say the Son of Man will be betrayed? That term made the rest of the Jews really angry with him. How dare you call yourself the Son of Man? Why is that important? Because that term is found in Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 to 14. And look what it says about the Son of Man, who he says he is. I kept watching night visions, and when I saw, coming with the clouds of heaven was someone like a son of man. He approached the Ancient One, and he was led into his presence. Yeshua is saying, I'm that Son of Man that you read about in the book of Daniel. That's me. That's why they got so mad at him. That's why they decided to crucify him. Because he had just identified himself as the one coming from the clouds of heaven like a Son of Man. And it says about the Son of Man, he was given rulership, glory, and a kingdom, so that all the peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. He's just told all the Torah scholars, I'm that one. I'm the one who will be given rulership. I'm the one who will be given a kingdom, and all the people and all the nations will serve me. Now you understand why they were mad at him? He just said to them, I'm that one. It says about the Son of Man, his rulership is an eternal rulership. It will not pass away. His kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Another Passover. We're almost finished with them. There's a lot of them in here. Look at Acts 12, 1-4. It was around this time King Herod began arresting and persecuting certain members of the Messianic community. He had Yaakov, Yochannan's brother, put to death by the sword. When Herod saw how much this pleased the Judeans, he went on to arrest Kepha as well, Peter. It was during the days of Matzah. So, when Herod seized him and threw him into prison, handing him over to the guards by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each, with the intention of bringing him to public trial after Pesach. They would never do a trial during Pesach. That would have really riled up the Jews. Herod wasn't going to take that chance. They were going to save him in the prison until afterward. But remember the story of Pesach? It's about deliverance, right? It's about deliverance from our enemies. It's about deliverance from our oppressors. Look what happens to him at this season. Acts 12, 7-10. Suddenly an angel of Adonai stood there, and a light shone in his cell. He tapped Kepha aside and said, "Hurry, get up." And the chains fell off his hands. The angel said, "Put on your clothes and sandals. Throw on your robe. Follow me." Going out, Kepha followed him. Having passed a guard, he's just passing right on through, just like the Passover story. He passes the first guard, and then a second. They arrive at an iron gate leading to the city, and it opened by itself, and they made their exit. Does that sound like the Passover story? Sure does. They pass right on through. The river's open. They go through. Here's Kepha. He can't go anywhere. They got a city gate, and all of a sudden, God just opens the gates. Why? Because it's right on God's calendar. It's Passover. So what's Passover about? Deliverance. Deliverance from our enemies and having supper with the King of Kings. 1 Corinthians 5, 7-8. For our Pesach lamb, the Messiah, has been sacrificed. So let us celebrate the Seder, the Passover meal, not leftover helmets, the helmets of wickedness and evil, but the matzah of purity and truth. So are we supposed to celebrate it? What do you think? Pretty clear. And I didn't count the number of Passovers. I should have. I think there were 7 mentioned. Is it possible that this one that we experienced this year is the 8th? Is it possible that this is the final Passover before Yeshua? Something to think about. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for having brought us through the journey thus far. We are almost to the promised land. We thank you for your word. We thank you for all of the wisdom that comes forth from your word. Lord, I ask for everyone to have enough stamina to get through the tail end of this journey, because this one is the greatest victory of them all. We thank you and we praise you in Yeshua's name. Amen. Time for a break. Just a few.